Blessings. Hatep and Ma'at. That means I'm offering you truth. I want to welcome you to the first episode of Taboos. So, welcome. If you're here with us live, I want you to feel free to tune in the chat room. The series is also going to be open to people who want to join the conversation live. Today is pretty much an introduction to Taboos so that everybody knows what this show is all about and exactly what we're going to be getting into every Tuesday at 7 moving forward. And that'll probably last us into the spring as well. And then we'll switch into some of the other series that we're bringing back. Our second season of Professor and Priestess and of the Navigating Eternity Ancient Astrology series. So if it's your first time here, welcome. I am Sanetem As Nefrka Heteru, aka Nef, and I am the mother of Tehuti Ma'at. Tehuti Ma'at is a resource mechanism. This platform is pretty much a media branch, digital branch of our revolutionary instrument, which is a grassroots cooperative institution builder. So we build cooperative institutions, and we also provide community services. We have several programs that you can read all about on tehutimat.org, from Organic Food for the People to Sankofa. We have our Amos Wilson collective. So shout out to our great ancestor, Nana Amos Wilson, who is the author of this book here, The Blueprint for Black Power, which is going to be heavily referenced actually in this series, to be honest with you. So I'm really excited about that. The Amos Wilson Collective is our collaboration with the African War College. And this series is going to be some really deep conversations, deep dives into some topics that we usually don't want to talk about. So as you can see by the title, the show is called Taboos, and Taboos is actually an acronym. So I want to shout out to my co-captain, Brother Omawale, because he helped me come up with the acronym, and it stands for Taking Accountability by Owning Our Shit. All right. So all of this to say, the conversations that we're going to have, because they are taboo topics, we're going to make sure that we have this conversation from the highest dimension, right? The highest plane or realm, bird's eye view, a spiritual perspective, because everything starts in spirit and then it takes form in flesh. And when we're dealing with taboos, things that are in the shadows, we're dealing with an aspect of spiritual warfare that I think a lot of us are really unfamiliar with, that I really want to demystify. I am a sacred wisdom keeper of ancient African sacred science. I'm a high priestess in the Kemetic tradition, and I am a farmer. I'm a healing artist, a singer, a revolutionary, amongst other things. But I think that my work within the realms of the ancient wisdom, particularly through agriculture, is really what is anchoring in what I want to transmit, and the message and the responsibility that I feel in this moment, this critical moment of healing that we're in, not only people of African ascent, but this entire planet. But this healing process for us as people of African ascent, bringing forward the resurrection that has been prophesized, right? Remembering who we are and taking responsibility and power over our stewardship of this planet, right? As the original farmers and gardeners of this planet, the original stewards of this planet, we have that responsibility. And it's one that we have set aside and allowed for all of this chaos to unfold into. And it's been part of a cyclical process that I think is very important for us to understand, right? So we're going to take this from a multidimensional approach. Another book that I usually love to reference, which actually my laptop is on top of, is the book Yorugu by Mama Marimba Ani. And Dr. Mama Marimba Ani does a really great job of anchoring us into some really powerful African-centered perspectives on looking at the culture that we are that's been imposed on us right now, right? Where most of us just choose to acquiesce to this culture, right? Because it's the dominant culture. And it's really the dominant culture on the planet, right? What we call American culture or capitalism, or, there's so many different ways that we can look at it. But really, it is the cultural implication of imperialism, right? What people call the white power structure on the planet, right? And obviously, understanding these are all constructs and ideas and things that are part of that structure. So, what I love about Mama Marimba's work is she challenges us to use our own perspective. And the whole conversation that we're going to be having about everything that we talk about is going to be rooted in power, because I find that we really struggle to examine and truly understand the power dynamics that are involved in our behaviors, our choices, and what is happening on the planet right now. And I want to make sure that we're able to sit on these two magnificent works, right, as a way to be culturally rooted and in the continuum of all of the great work that has been done before us, right? Before Tehuti Ma'at is here as a continuum of the African world revolution. So that being said, taboos is really important because one of the things that we really need to be conscious of and recognize is how much of our energy is being leaked out. And it's in the spaces that we don't want to look at and where we don't want to give attention to. And for me personally, I am focused and dedicated to putting a laser bullseye on the sexual wound that we're experiencing collectively. And the reason why is because that's the main area that our energy is leaking from, because we are not aware of the dynamics of sex and the energy that is exchanged, and what exactly sexual energy is, which is creative energy. It is our life force. So by not taking a hold of and truly examining and shining a light on sex, sexuality, and all of the other topics that I'm going to begin to unpack as far as some of the ideas that I have about um, the series Taboos, and messages that I know are important and conversations that I know are important for us to have. But I also want you to be able to inform that conversation. So for those of you who are here with us live, please tap in the chat. I definitely want to hear from you. Again, I am going to be dropping the link so that you can join the conversation also. But I do want to know what types of conversations people are interested in having that usually there isn't the space for. I genuinely am built for this. Like the capacity that I have to go into those spaces, to have certain conversations in a non-judgmental way, is something that I've worked up to over the past decade. And a lot of that is because of this decade focused on healing sexual trauma. Because in my personal journey is where I was able to cultivate and brew a lot of the medicine that has come forward through this work of Tehuti Ma'at, right? And birthing this instrument and being able to create different ways for us to go through healing processes and self-development that is rooted in our cosmic consciousness, right? So welcome, Brother Omawale. So I do want to shout out Brother Jadorian. Honor and respect to you too, brother, and our brother Omawali. So welcome. Got daddy duties. But I'm glad you're here. And whoever else is here with us live, tune in the chat. Let us know that you're here, and we want you to be a part of the conversation. So that being said, as I was saying, our sexual energy is where we're leaking the most of our energy. It's why we're not yet at the space of truly wielding our sovereignty and our power. and organizing ourselves to the degree that we need to, particularly in our masculine energy. And when I say that, I don't mean the males only. I mean just the imbalance of both masculine and feminine energy. But because the masculine energy is the active energy and it is the greatest threat to the status quo, in perception, right? Because I'm going to introduce a different idea around that. But historically, we know about lynchings and how our brothers were actually castrated when they were lynched, and what that psychologically tells us, what that symbolically tells us about the psychology of the power dynamics involved in our so-called oppression, right? Because we have to take the power of definition first and foremost, right? So the power of definition, we have to begin with the definition that our brother Huey P. Newton provided us. So I actually think I have that definition on here because I would love to put that on the screen. So power is the ability to define phenomenon and make it act in a desired manner. Okay, this is the quote by Huey P. Newton. For anyone who's not familiar with who Huey P. Newton is, he was the co-founder, along with Bobby Seale, of the original Black Panther Party. And even though that definition is not used in Anna Amos Wilson's book, I do highly recommend that people get the Blueprint for Black Power if you don't have the book. And I do recommend that you join Tehuti Ma'a if you want to be able to go through the book and study the book in a collective space where we can actually examine it and put it into practical use, because we're going to be restarting our Think study groups, study sessions. So I'm feeling really strongly about that. But the first chapter is a really great chapter where power is actually defined. What is power? And this definition of power is not in there, but I think it's very important that we look at this definition of power, because our ability to define our reality, to narrate what is happening, is where we have to begin to reclaim our power. So when I said that the greatest threat was the masculine energy, really what the greatest threat is the union of masculine and feminine energy. That's why our sexual energy is under attack. That's why there's so much sexual manipulation. That's why capitalism is really rooted in using sexual manipulation to sell everything. Right? And we don't realize how sexually vulnerable we are, especially because we're dealing with the continuum of the things that we're carrying in our bloodline, in addition to the things that we're actually experiencing and recycling from that trauma. But even if we don't recycle and experience the incest or the sexual abuse directly, we still have that genetic memory. Right? We have the genetic memory of being in breeding camps that is developing this over-sexualization, especially amongst our men, right? And literally sexual addiction. We have the ancestral memory of rape and all kinds of other things. So this entire conversation has a trigger warning on it, for the record, because everything that we're going to talk about are going to be things that can be triggering. And I want to welcome us to look at triggers as opportunities and not even judge the trigger, right? Because when we're talking about something being sparked or triggered in us, it's because it's showing us an area that we need healing in. And if we try to avoid the trigger, then we're avoiding the opportunity that it provides us. So I want us to be aware that whatever comes up for you, I do want you to be aware of what it brings up for you emotionally, but also physically. Because sometimes when we feel triggered by something, especially those of us who may not be as connected with our emotions and maybe as emotionally aware, it's important to recognize that everything is connected. So we'll also feel those things in our body. And sometimes it's easier for us to feel those things in our body before we can actually sense and process what it is emotionally, right? So just be aware of that as we go through the conversation, because all of the things that we're going to be talking about during this series are things that have not happened in a vacuum. There have been progressively cycling through our collective consciousness, right? And when I say that, I just mean the masses of our people, all of us. We're all connected in this system, this universe. Everything is all one. And we're returning back to that space. And the individualism that we've come through in this cycle is something that is going to be honored, because we're moving into an age that's going to be holding both and that's the basis of how we have this conversation from an African-centered perspective. So we always have to put things into context so we recognize how we're going to enter into the conversation, so that our emotions do not dominate the conversations and we're able to actually process and unpack and receive what comes forward from the conversation. So we have to be aware that in an African worldview, we're dealing with both and. So when we look at the duality or the complementary energies that are constantly cycling, right? Again, an expression of sexual energy, of active and receptive energy. For everything that we experience, we know that there's an equal and opposite, right? So we know there's left and right. There's up, there's down, there's male, there's female, there's masculine, there's feminine, there's active, there's receptive. There are all these ways, there's day and night, right? That we see the sexual play of energy. And it's important for us to recognize that the Greco-Roman, like the European ideology, is always for us to look at things and separate them. That's why we're in an individual mentality, right? Because we're building off of that Greek and Roman paradigm, right? That's literally what this culture is constructed on. So we're looking at things as either or. We're separating them, we're examining them. That's the essence of the scientific practice that is present right now on the planet, right? It's more of a matter of looking at things as isolated pieces and objectifying them. So we're looking at things from a different perspective, from the African worldview, because we're looking at both and we're looking at things holistically. And we recognize that you need both in order to synthesize information. But when you look at something as either or and you objectify it and you separate yourself from it, you create a dynamic of conflict, right? Because you now feel like there's a choice and you feel like these things are separate. So when we go into these conversations and I bring in the sacred science, recognize that the sacred science is holding both and the essence of it is to connect and merge and to make whole, to bring things together. So we're not just going to examine one thing. We're always going to look at the full scope of the dynamic. So our analytical framework is going to be based on Dr. Leonard Jeffries' pyramid analysis, which means we're going to examine the culture, the economics, and the politics of everything that we talk about, so that we're making sure we have this tertiary perspective on the whole picture and how each aspect impacts us. And I'll unpack that and go a little bit deeper into that as we go along. So if you're here with us live again, I do want you to tap in the chat. Let us know that you're here. And I want to know what some of the topics are that you want us to discuss during the Taboos series, right? I also want to open the way with some sound healing just to clear the energy, because the conversations that we're going to be having they can be heavy, they can be dense, and we're going to go with the flow today and just see what type of conversation naturally you guys want to go into. And I really want you to be involved. That's the benefit of you being here with us live. So I do want you to inform the conversation that we're going to have, right? But first and foremost, I'm just going to open the way to make sure that we clear the energy. I know that everything that we do, even in the virtual realm, is very spiritual, right? It's just in a lower dimension, right? So we talk about, we know 3D is the third dimension. So when we're looking at these screens, we're talking about something that's two-dimensional, sometimes even one-dimensional. So we're just going into that space, recognizing that this is a space that already segments and removes us from an aspect of the physical world, right? So for me personally, as a high priestess, everything that I do is a ritual. So having this conversation is a ritual with the intention that we shine a light and cast out these demons and the possession that these energies and the access that these energies have to us, to our minds, to our bodies, to our spirits, so that we can clear and open the way for us to fill those voids so that those energies and those thought forms and addictions and those things don't have access to us. So if you're here and you're present, then I trust that you need this medicine, right? So you're going to be a part of this conversation, and we're just going to open the way and just clear the space. All right. And I don't know if it's going to actually be able to capture the frequency. All right. So shout out also to Eye of Heru, tuned in from DC, cooking dinner with my teenage daughter. So please don't mention that so they don't get mad. What am I not mentioning? Well, I don't know. We can't have a censored conversation. Taboos isn't going to be a censored conversation. So I give that disclaimer off the top, right? It has to be a candid conversation. And I am curious how old your daughters are, because a lot of these conversations that we do try to censor, and that's if I even comprehended what you said correctly. But my point is, especially for our young ones, like there are a lot of conversations that we're shielding them from and that we're not having that we need to have, because they're being exposed to these things, and we're not wielding the power that we have within our family, which is the main institution that we have to embrace. And there's a power dynamic within the institution of family. I didn't want you to mention they were listening, but too late. Oh, sorry. Well, welcome, family. So everybody who's listening, welcome. And I apologize because I really didn't fully comprehend what your message said. But nonetheless, again, I think it's important for us to not have so much censorship, especially when it comes to our children, to the young people, and making sure that we're wielding the power dynamic that we have within our families. Because one thing that I've noticed is that when we opt out of having certain conversations, it's really because we feel uncomfortable to some extent in having certain conversations. And a lot of us are uncomfortable with the power that we do need to take in order to, like, the responsibility that comes along with it, with that power. We feel uncomfortable with that. And we have to hold that power in order to have sovereignty, right? And to be self-sufficient. And that applies on a microcosm for ourselves personally, but also on a macrocosm when we're looking at the African collective, right? And how we move on the planet and how we can move with a degree of power through unity, right? So that's why we talk about the Pan-African objective and making sure that all African people everywhere unite and have a direct connection to our lineage and are anchored and rooted, because that's the only way that we'll be able to wield that power collectively in order to change the power dynamics that we're currently experiencing. All right. So we have a 14 and 17-year-old. That's great. Perfect ages. So one of the things that I do want to ask y'all again, what are some of the conversations that you want to have for taboos? I'm also going to, I can go ahead and drop the link in. So if anyone does begin to want to come into the stream, you can do that. All right. So I'll put that link for anyone who wants to come in and just be on the stream. Just turn your camera on. Try to be somewhere where you have good lighting if you do choose to come into the stream. Now, there's a couple of different conversations that I've already had outlined that I want to make sure that we cover as we go through the series for sure. But I think there will be other topics that just come up naturally. And again, I want it to be an engaged conversation. And each Tuesday, I want to open the space for people to actually come on the live stream and be a part of the conversation. So it'll actually be a dialogue and a discussion. So that being said, you get to inform the conversation that we have as well. Now, next Tuesday, the first episode is going to be, or the first like official episode is going to be called Dirty Little Secrets. Okay. We're going to really unpack what is in a secret and some of the shadow elements. And I'm going to just open up a little bit about foundationally a spiritual awareness that we need to have in order to even, build up this energy work that we're doing with this series, which is the awareness of what the subconscious realm is, right? So we know that in existence, which in Medu Neter, which is the ancient language of our ancestors, the divine communication, as it would be translated in, right? What many people know, or is commonly known as the hieroglyphs. That in the Medu Neter, in that language, the word or the vibration, neter, right? Many people read it as neter. My spiritual father, Baba Heru, shared with me, because there's different translations. Sometimes the translation is that the sound is more of a T. Sometimes it's more of a D. So you have different translations in the realm of Kemetic science. And it's really because it's more of a clicking sound. So because our tongues are colonized, we do have to awaken our tongues, and we have to remember the sounds and vibrations that we had in ancient times are not the sounds and vibrations that we're using right now. So it's right? And many people know that as neter, but the vibration of neter is the totality of everything, right? It's what we usually perceive as the God concept, or interpret as the God concept, I should say. But the reality is the God concept, in the way that we've learned it through Western religions, right? Which really come from, right? Because I also, another great book to reference is Dr. Yosef Ben Yakinen's book, The African Origins of the Major Western Religions, right? Because yes, the origin is African, but that's not what we're dealing with right now, right? So there's a distinction to be made there. However, when we look at the God concept in modern Western religions, the God concept, regardless of what it's called, it is a masculine principle, and it's dealing with what's active and what has been created. Neter, or in the ancient origin, right, of this concept of everything, is not only what has been created, but it's also what hasn't been created. So it is all of existence and non-existence. It's the totality of everything, because it is androgynous. It is not masculine or feminine. It's not male or female. It is the energy of all. So it's androgynous in the sense that it's both, right? So the subconscious or the unconscious realm, what hasn't been created or in existence, is the darkness of the chaos of the cosmos, right? Well, you have cosmos and you have chaos. Cosmos would be the organization of the multiverse or the universe, right? And the chaos is everything that's not in existence, right? And it's just in chaos. And there's constant cycles in the universe, right? And in ancient times, we had a 26,000 year calendar, which we would look at these cycles and how they would unfold, where we're going from chaos to order and chaos to order, right? So that is akin to what we look at when we look at the revolution around the planet. And we look at how we are moving constantly every 24 hours as well, from day to night. We have the sunrise and the sunset. So there's these cycles exist across the spectrum, right? So if we look at day and night in the simplest way, we can look at night as the chaos and day as order, right? Because our solar system, and when we experience the sun and the illusion of light that the sun provides us, because technically we're always in darkness, because we're always in the cosmos, we're always in space. Our planet is in space. We are on a planet that's in the cosmos. So everything is surrounded by darkness. We're in a womb. The universe is a womb, right? But then when we experience daylight, depending on our movement and our position on our planet, we get to experience the light of the sun in our solar system, which provides us with order. This is important for us to recognize, mainly because we have to see that it's a cycle. So we don't have to be so attached to this particular phase that we're in, that humanity is in right now, of chaos. And we have to be clear that we're moving into order. And that order is what we call Ma'at, right? So Tehuti and Ma'at being two complementary forces of the universe. For anyone who's not familiar, Tehuti is the force of universal law, and Ma'at is the force of cosmic order, right? So Tehuti is the masculine and it represents the mind, and Ma'at is the feminine and represents the heart. So when we have these holistic conversations, we're dealing with both the mind and the heart, our sensory, right, emotional space, and our mental, logical space. So we can do both, right? Remember what I said in the beginning, we have to do both and in order to have these conversations. So the reason why I'm expressing all of that is because when we're going into the unconscious, we're going into the feminine space. And this is the space of empowerment that we have to take control of the narrative. When I said power is the ability to define phenomenon, and I quoted Huey, we have to define for ourselves in a particular moment. Attacking the masculine was the most effective way to stifle change and transformation on the planet. But with where we are right now, we have to come into balance with the masculine and feminine expression of energy on the planet. So because we're in a system that's dominated by, it's a patriarchal system, right? It's coming from that Greco-Roman European paradigm. And the African paradigm was matrilineal or matrifocal, not meaning that the woman was on top of the man in the way that the patriarchy is based on the male being on top of the woman, but it was a system of balance. But the lineage came from the woman. So even though you had the male operating in the highest position of authority, which is called the Nesubiti, which many of us know as the pharaoh, that was a masculine or a male role, right? Even though we did have women who held that position, it was considered to be a position for a man. And the feminine was still what carried the throne or the power. So the power and authority was given to the man by whom? His mother, the lineage of the mother. So we lifted the mother principle, and that's what will bring us back into balance. So when we're talking about going into the shadow space, we're talking about dealing with the shadows. So some people are familiar with the idea of shadow work, right? Going in and dealing with your trauma and your pain and the things that about yourself that you don't like, that the parts of us that we really try to keep hidden. That's considered to be shadow work. That's feminine work, because you have to submit to it to a degree, right? You have to surrender and you have to release control. The masculine energy is active and it is controlling, right? So it's the opposite. So in order for us to have these conversations, we do have to go into a more feminine space. We have to go into emotional space, because we're talking about emotional healing. Because our disconnect from the feminine, our disconnect from our emotions, and that's not just for men, it can be women as well. Because many of us, especially those of us of African descent, many of us in female bodies with wombs actually have an imbalance with our own emotions and can be moving more so in our masculine energy. And a lot of that is because of the power dynamics that have shifted when we look at the attack on the family. So when we talk about looking at how we deal with the issues, which most of the taboos really are dealing with sexuality and sex or the dynamics thereof, right? Because if we're talking about abortion, which is a topic that we usually don't want to talk about or deal with, because when we look at the reality that millions of potential lives are being taken away, or we're literally sacrificing them by choice, right? That's something that we don't usually want to deal with, but that's still a dynamic of sex. And we usually don't have that conversation within the context of power. And what does that mean about our power? And that's a conversation I'm very interested in unpacking because of my own personal experience. So absolutely not coming from a place of judgment, and also dealing with the reality and the truth of what it actually expresses about our culture and the culture that we've embraced, which is now focused on death, right? We went from a life-centered culture, right, when we carried the ankh, to now the cross dynamic of the culture, right? When we're talking about Christianity being an emphasis on death. And that's an expression of the European influence on the world, right? Through death and domination, decay and disease. So all of that is the opposite of life, regeneration, healing, health, vitality, right? So you can't have one without the other. So we have to go into the conversations when we're dealing with the shadow realm without judging those things, because we have to recognize that they exist for a reason. So because we're moving in cycles, we have to have night in order to value day. We can't have one without the other. So when it comes to death, if we didn't have death and our lives were not finite, would we really value our experience here if it just was perpetual? Even though our spirits exist in eternity, when we incarnate in the flesh, we know that none of us are going to make it out alive, right? So that's a part of this dimension, of this realm, of this planet, and this human experience that we come to have, to grow and to cultivate our spirits. It's to experience and feel and sense. So we have to allow ourselves to process what that experience is and what it's for. So that gives us a healthy distance emotionally to be able to process these topics, such as abortion, for example, right? Which takes a serious toll, not only on the womb, but spiritually for both the mother and the father. That's another aspect of the conversation that we usually don't have, is what's happening with our brothers as well. Because I think when it comes to the conversation of abortion, usually they're completely left out of that conversation in terms of how they're impacted and affected, their voice, the power dynamics involved. So that's one taboo topic, right? So this episode, we're not going to go into that topic, but we're just exploring what are some of the topics that we're going to be discussing so that you can come prepared to have conversations, questions, and explorations that you want to, excavate during these streams that we're going to be doing on Tuesdays. So that's one aspect. I mentioned sex and sexuality. Pornography is going to be a big topic that we're going to discuss. We're going to discuss that because it's one of the most taboo things that most of us are not comfortable talking about, is our exposure to it, our children being exposed to it, the reality that we're not taking the power and having the conversations with our children. But some of us don't even have the foundation to even have those conversations because we don't have healthy sexual practices and a healthy connection to what sex is. So we're either teaching this virtuous perspective of, interacting with sex as if, from a purist perspective, and, oh, well, you can't have sex until you're married, or like we have these idealistic approaches that we want to teach our children, or it's just a complete hands-off approach, or we feel like we need to be free sexually and be able to experience whatever we want. And we're not dealing with the full ramifications of what happens when we choose to engage with someone sexually, and what's the energetic dynamic and the power dynamic at play when we engage with someone sexually. That's on an individual level. On a collective level, when we're dealing with a culture of promiscuity that's encouraging and inviting sex work, right, prostitution, and like desensitizing us to it by calling it something like sex work and normalizing it, right? What ramifications does that have on the power dynamics within the culture, knowing that sex and our sexual energy is our life force? That's what I mean when I say we're leaking, we're literally hemorrhaging our sexual energy when it comes to promiscuity. So there's an aspect of sexuality that we have to find the center within. And I do that work through sexual alchemy. So sexual alchemy is the expression of learning the sacred science of sexual energy and being able to actually know how to utilize and connect with and see where you have to heal your sexual energy by looking at the 12 realms of energy in the body. And that includes the astral body, because not all of them are physical points in our body. So that's a whole, teaching within itself. But some of those elements are things that I will bring up throughout some of these conversations that we have, because it's necessary for us to recognize and know the power of our sexual energy. But I also want people to know that I am doing the sexual alchemy retreats now, which are going to be every February here for Carnival here in Cabo Verde. So if you're interested in reading more information about that, I'll just put that on the screen so you can see it. Let me actually put it as a ticker, so it'll just be at the bottom. And I feel like I want this to be back at red. So, oops. All right. So if you want more information about sexual alchemy, you can go to sexualalchemy.com. You can get some information if you're interested in doing the retreats. I'll also be doing the sexual alchemy workshops and things. So if you are interested in getting more information about anything like that, then I do recommend that you follow us on Instagram, and you can get more information on there. So I'll make sure all the links are in the description as well. But that's the essence of the sexual alchemy work, right? Is we have to recognize that our sexual energy, in order for us to actually activate it and use it to create and to actually be able to carry out our visions and our soul missions in this life, we have to have some degree of sexual discipline in order to know how to utilize and circulate our sexual energy. And that doesn't mean that we don't have sex or engage in sexual behavior, but we have to understand the dynamics. And then that can allow us to engage sexually from an empowered place. Okay? Because when we're looking at something like pornography in the sex industry, we're not aware of what exactly is happening in terms of our power in that dynamic, right? Because when we're dealing with that level of addiction, or what becomes an addiction, is the way that it affects our brain, the central nervous system literally escalates the level of addiction and what the mind is now going to seek to get more of that dopamine, right? And it's beyond that. Like it's even more, because there's even more hormones that are released, and the chemistry, right? Because that's the alchemy, right? The chem in there is also the root of chemistry, right? So we're dealing with the biochemistry of our bodies and recognizing how sexual energy and sexual activation impacts our biological chemistry. So those are all things that we have to learn and become aware of. And it's time that we stop taking such a rudimentary approach to things. It's not just about knowledge anymore. We have to not only know certain things, we have to believe them enough, right? Both and we have to believe them enough to apply them to our lives and actually use them. And that's when it becomes wisdom. So when it comes to our sexual energy, we have a lot of topics that we're going to have to discuss. There's a lot of sexual trauma. Even with the movie that just came out, The Color Purple, I was thinking about another big topic that we have a hard time dealing with is incest. And a lot of the womb healing work that I've done in the womb circles, you know, I've continued to be blown aback by how common it is. And I also think that it's important that we have space to have conversations about sexual abuse and sexual trauma with our brothers, because men experience a lot of sexual trauma and sexual abuse that goes unsaid, and they don't really have the same level of space and even the same emotional capacity to actually process the sexual trauma and sexual wounds that they experience. And that vulnerability is what's preyed upon, because then their energy is stifled, right? Through things like pornography. And again, these expressions can happen on both sides. We can have sex addiction on the side of the woman as well. But these are things that I'll open up more deeply when we have that conversation, because I really want to have the conversation, because I seen this interesting dichotomy that was presented between the OnlyFans, um, the OnlyFans model, for example, and the incel, right? The involuntarily celibate person who's consuming that content. And what happens with looking at pornography is it actually creates a limitation for us to actually be able to have real, true intimacy. So that's creating a huge void within, and we're not aware that we're not being able to be intimate with ourselves, never mind being intimate with another person. And then that's exacerbating that divide that I mentioned between the male and the female. If we need men and women to come together to produce children, for us to produce family, for us to proliferate life on the planet, then obviously this needs to be a key interest for us. And if we're dealing with an industry that is capitalizing on and literally making money off of making sure that you actually are sexually weak, and not only that, it's incentivized to make you go deeper and deeper into more taboo aspects of sexuality, because it's incentivized through money. It's literally a business, it's an industry. Then we have to look at that, right? But the area of power that we have within that dynamic is looking at the addiction to it and recognizing that we have to deal with that on an emotional level within ourselves, because that has now created a spiritual attachment. And that's the aspect that I think is important for us to deal with when it comes to the sexual topics that we're going to unpack. Because when we talk about people being possessed and we say these types of things, or we talk about demons or entities having a hold on the spirit, that happens through the voids that we create within ourselves when we try to escape ourselves, or when we do something or something happens to us that creates shame or guilt, right? And because of that dynamic, we put that thing in the shadow. We don't want to deal with it. We don't want to talk about it. Sometimes we act like it never happened because it is so uncomfortable, whether you're the perpetrator or the victim, right? Because now you're dealing with something that's now become a secret. So these are the things that we're going to unpack in the next episode, dirty little secrets, because we're going to really have to deal with what's happening energetically, what's happening in the unseen realm, right? Again, going into the subconscious, into the feminine, into the realms that many of us can't see, right? And what's happening is we're creating energetic cords and attachments to certain thoughts and ideas, because everything has a frequency. Every thought also vibrates, just like our words vibrate. And we have to go back to the baseline of science, right? So when we're dealing with, like, for example, this glass is vibrating at a certain frequency. Anything that's solid, it's only because it's vibrating at a certain frequency that creates a density. That's literally why we see colors. This is baseline science that we're not applying to our actual day-to-day lives to recognize how we function and to bring it back to simple terms to make sure that we actually get it. Everything is vibration. So whenever you think a thought, or a thought is injected into you, right? It's inculcated into you through something that you've watched that was not created by you. And most of the things that we see are actually weaponized against us. So we also have to stop being so naive as we move through the world and recognize that we're in a state of war. And because we're in a state of war, we have to recognize when we're going into battle. And a lot of us are not arming ourselves, and we're just moving through the world very naively and not looking at everything in the context of war. So we have to do that, especially when it comes to sex, because I have to quote Lauryn Hill on this one. Spiritual warfare is through relationships and connections. So it's through our relationships that we're experiencing a lot of these battles, through our connections to others. Because when we deal with the unseen, we're dealing with, like I said, there's these thought forms that we attach ourselves to, or that attach themselves to us. But there's other entities, and those can be insecurities. Those can be, there's different spirits, like the spirit of suicide is a really big one right now. And that definitely attaches itself to our sexual wounds. So when we talk about shining the light and talking about these things, that in itself is such powerful energy work, because you expose the light on it. It's an exorcism. You shine the light on it, and that thing cannot exist and have that much power over you. And the more light you shine on it, the more people witness it, the more people you tell, the more you release the shame and the guilt and the things that it feeds off of, right? The less power it has over you. But you have to begin to fill that space. You have to take your own power. But when something happens to us sexually that takes our power, for example, when I was a child, I was molested. And until I was 23 years old, I didn't ever acknowledge it. I never even allowed myself to narrate it in that way. I never told myself I was molested. It wasn't until my adulthood when I threatened to jump out of a window. And thankfully my partner went and told our elder, and he was like, there's something deeper that's there that you might want to examine. Like, to have someone who has that wisdom to actually guide me within myself, for me to recognize, yeah, that happened to me. And then I remember the first time I said it out loud to someone, and I felt that freedom and that liberation. And it's a very scary thing to think about, saying that thing for the first time. But that's the space we have to begin to cultivate in our relationships, in our families, right? Because depending on each person's disposition, some people don't feel as comfortable opening up about certain things because the way it's going to be received. And, in certain families, like, it's pushed down even more. Like, no, we're not going to tell nobody that happened, or we're going to act like you're lying. We're not going to even believe you. Right? So there's all these dynamics, and all of that creates fear, and that creates a perpetual dynamic for that entity, that demon, to further fester and take up more space, because it's going to convince you not to say anything, because it wants that thing to exist in the shadow, because that shadow is going to allow it to have more power over you. This is the real threat that we have. The threat is actually within us. It's nothing outside of us. The reason why I can move through the world with so much courage and light is because nothing that I've experienced, that I've ever done, that none of it has a power over me anymore, because I faced all of it. And that's why I want to make sure that we have these conversations, because we have to face ourselves, and we have to go into that darkness and move through that darkness to birth the light that we're going to be able to then illuminate and shine for other people. But if we don't go into that space, then we're a liability to ourselves. quite literally. When we're talking about the suicide and not wanting to live anymore, that's quite literally those entities having a power over us. And the more that we're able to cultivate the space to be able to go into that darkness, right? And there's a lot of supports and different things that we can use to go into that space. But we have to have the courage to even pursue that, to even want to go there. And I always tell people, you don't need anything outside of yourself. You genuinely don't. But I do recognize that there's different types of people, different types of personality. The way that I'm built, my star print, like my energy signature is built for that. Like I can do that. And I can get comfortable in the uncomfortable spaces. But not everybody can do that. And not everybody also has like emotional distance as well. Some of us are very immersed in our emotions. So the experience of how we move through those things and heal has to be different, right? So I can express what I'm expressing, but the reason why I want these to be conversations is because each of us is moving through our own experience, right? And because we're all interconnected, we can shine a light and we can support each other in ways that we can't even imagine, just by telling our own story, how much that can support someone in what they're navigating through. They might not be like you, but that helps them to shine a light. It's a mirror, right? So sometimes you need that mirror position in a certain place for you to see you got something right here. You know what I mean? Like you got to see behind your head. You got to position the mirror in a certain way. And that's how we function and how everything is woven together. Every single person that we align with in our lives is a reflection for a particular purpose. And if we can have that level of intent and meaning in our experience, and we can see that everything happens for a reason, and actually root ourselves back into our cultural, ecological, cosmic connection, then we can begin to experience life in a more fulfilling way and recognize the experience is meaningful. Otherwise, these entities and energies are going to want to make you feel like none of it matters and will have you trying to take yourself out of here. So, but all of that is then attached to our emotional trauma and our emotional pain and our emotional wounds. So I did put the link in the chat. If you're here with us live, I do want you to go ahead and put in any questions you have, because I'm going to wrap up the stream if no one wants to come in and be part of informing the conversations and letting me know what types of conversations and topics that you want to make sure that we cover during the series. I'm also going to definitely cover things like witchcraft and magic and energy manipulation, because that's now becoming a really big thing that's happening under the shadows. People are really, and we have to make a strong distinction between spirituality and sacred science and healing and manipulation. And there's a lot of that happening as well. You have people coming into the unseen realm and like with a lot of ignorance and also a lot of programming, and coming in from someone else's cultural orientation that's not rooted and anchored in life and liberty and sovereignty, really, because we shouldn't be messing with anyone else's energy. We should be focusing on what's going on with our own energy. But again, that's another distorted power dynamic, because we then want to wield power over other people and dominate other people. So again, we want to have these conversations always rooted and anchored back into power. And eventually we'll just begin to see that the power dynamic is that we need to become more comfortable with carrying our own power and stop giving our power away. So there's going to be a lot of ways that we need to reclaim our power. And those are the things that will come up as we begin to explore some of the other dynamics. I definitely want to talk about sexually transmitted diseases and demons, the energy aspect of the disease itself, but also the physical aspect of the disease. That's something also that I don't feel like we talk about enough. And because of that, it's becoming very, very problematic. And we have a lot of sexually transmitted diseases going around, and then there's no dialogue about it. Again, very taboo. So we need to talk about that. So are there any other topics for those of you who are here with us live? I've been trying to figure out who you look like, and I finally realized Mara. I don't know who that is. um, Hold on, I have to look up who that is. So if anyone wants to join the stream, I put the link in there. I can put the link in again. We're going to have our first official episode next Tuesday. I want you guys to be able to inform the conversation, but next Tuesday's conversation definitely is going to be dirty little secrets, and we're going to really unpack what's going on with the underbelly of a lot of the things that are happening, that we're experiencing, that we're wanting to keep secret. And the reality is there's no secrets in the divine mind. And recognizing that. And what a secret actually does is tether us to demonic forces. Another taboo topic I want to talk about is aliens. Because I'm seeing a lot of conversations coming up right now around aliens and extraterrestrials. And I find that a lot of people are getting very confused in that conversation and are starting to believe these narratives that are not anchored at all in any type of cultural orientation. We really have to begin to be aware of what we allow ourselves to believe and how we process and discern information. That's going to be a really big conversation as well, because that's directly connected with the whole demon space, right? Like, what are we actually talking about when we're talking about aliens? What is extraterrestrial? Recognizing our cosmic nature and the fact that we are actually extraterrestrial. So I want to go deep into that as well, because I think that's another taboo topic that we usually don't want to talk about. And then now there's all this propaganda right now around getting people to believe in aliens in a very particular way. So I want to have that. A singer from the Bay Area in Oakland. All right, I'm gonna look into her. What type of singer is she? Just if anyone else wants to look this person up, because usually when people say I look like someone, I usually don't think I do, but I'm gonna look her up. All right, is anyone gonna tap into the conversation? Any topics that you want us to discuss? Anything that you want to inform for the series? Any thoughts you have about it? Let me know. I will give a bit more housekeeping things for people who are not familiar with Tehuti Ma'at. We have a membership program called the Tehuti Ma'at Militia. And as a member of the militia, you get access to our private server, aka the ARC, which stands for the African Rehabilitation Center. It's our digital space where we have our different chat channels and we have our exclusive members only gatherings. So we do a monthly cipher, a healing cipher, which is going to be on Saturday. We also have our Community Connect on Saturday. And then on Sunday, which is the last Sunday of every month, we have our warrior workout. And for the winter, we're doing African martial arts. So that's going to be this Sunday on the 28th. So if you're interested in joining, even at the Kingdom rank, which is the first rank or first tier of membership, you get access to all of that. And then as you get into the higher ranks, you get access to more of the educational content. So the Empire rank gets access to Tehuti Ma'at Academy, and you get free access to any of the classes and workshops that we have. And you don't have to pay for those. And then if you're in the Galaxy rank, you actually get to be part of the accountability community and contribute to the cooperatives that we're building. So you have a more involved approach. And also, if you're just interested in supporting Tehuti Ma'at in the community service work, such as Organic Food for the People, which is our initiative to create a sovereign food system and a network of growers and an educational platform around that, with teaching people about health, nutrition, organic agriculture, why it's important for us to grow our own food, how to heal your body naturally, etc. all of that. And you can get that information again at tehutimaat.org. So I'll put that up as well. All right. And all right. Well, Nguzo, thank you for sharing that with me. Soul music, real vintage vibration. That sounds like something I'd be interested in as well. And I'm going to be sharing more of my music as well. So I do want to let y'all know, I also, in the description, I put a link. I just created a personal Instagram channel. So I just did that a couple of days ago. So you can follow me personally on Instagram, and I'll be sharing more of my voice, my art on that platform as well. So I guess if we don't have any other input into the conversation today, I am looking forward to having some of these conversations with you all. So we're going to be talking about, again, going into the shadow space, how to do shadow work. That's what we're going to be talking about next Tuesday. Dirty Little Secrets. We're probably going to go into some pop culture. I'm going to have to use some of those references and things because I realize I'm going to have to get y'all warmed up to be a part of these conversations and join the talks. So we're definitely going to be talking about how these things are being experienced in popular culture and how that's a reflection of what's going on with us all collectively. So we'll be talking about that. We'll be talking about sexuality, sexual healing, sexual addiction, pornography, sexually transmitted demons and diseases, abortion, witchcraft. We're going to be talking about body dysmorphia and loving ourselves. We're going to be talking about this explosion of plastic surgery. We're going to be talking about domestic violence as well and how we need to restore our dignity and respect for one another. We're going to be talking about the music and entertainment industry as well, because there's a lot of taboos there, and that space nurtures a lot of rot for us culturally, and just other aspects of the death culture in general, and even sexual orientation as well. So I look forward to being here every Tuesday at 7 with you. And again, these conversations are going to be lives that you can join. I'll always drop the link for you to come into the studio, turn on your camera, and be part of the conversation with me. And I'll see you next Tuesday. All right. I hope that everyone has a beautiful, blessed night. I'm also going to put our contact information on the screen for anyone who wants to reach out about anything in particular. You can always email us at grow@tehutimaat.org. And you can also text us at 646-883-MAAT. And I'll just acknowledge this last message here. Peru hands was messy from cooking, but I want to thank you for this. As a single father trying to raise daughters in the Afrocentric dynamic, having a woman's voice is important. Hopefully we can continue to tune in. I hope so too. I really do. And I hope that you can be a part of the conversation and actually engage in the conversation. I love to have intergenerational conversations. So if the young ladies are interested in being part of the conversation, I do welcome them as well, because I think it's important for us to know, like, what's the vantage point that we're being exposed to different things in. We don't have to get super personal. I like to get personal because for me, sharing my story and expressing that level of vulnerability, I think opens the space for others to do the same and to know that we're not alone. You know, I know it's difficult for people to really process how much darkness that I've moved through because of how I carry myself and how bright my energy is. But that really is because I moved through a lot of trauma and a lot of pain. And I consciously chose to do that and really move through and transform and alchemize that energy. So that's the wisdom that I intend to share throughout this series. So I appreciate the opportunity and the receptivity of everyone who is here and who will continue to show up. And I look forward to having some of you all in the conversations as well. All right. Have a beautiful night and travel light wherever you move. All right. Power, your subject was so on point. I know they were listening, even though they act like they wasn't. All right, bro. I appreciate you, and I hope to see you next Tuesday. All right. Power.